Welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mackowski, and joining me today is my friend and colleague, Mike Block. Mike, how are you today?
I'm doing good, Chris. Good afternoon. How you doing?
Doing fantastic, thanks. And kind of an exciting moment for you to have your first book in print about the Battle of Cedar Mountain.
It is exciting. It was an extremely long process between the writing aspect and the challenges I had with work and other things going on. But I'll tell you what, the last 8-9 weeks has just been a whirlwind of activity between the marketing and the book coming out and sending them out to everybody. It's just been a wonderful experience.
Oh, it's been great to have you as part of the lineup. The book is called The Carnage Was Fearful, The Battle of Cedar Mountain. And Mike, what I really like most about the book, I mean, aside from just, it's a cool battle and lots of Stonewall Jackson mythology, but you reframe the Battle of Cedar Mountain in a way that was really illuminating for me. Talk about, how people typically think about Cedar Mountain and how you reframed that.
Sure. Typically the Battle of Cedar Mountain, I think, is kind of a precursor or the first action in the campaign of the Second Manassas or Second Bull Run campaign. And the OR, it's all linked right in there. It's it's in the same volume, so people just naturally assume it is part of that. But as I started getting knowledgeable about Cedar Mountain in the mid 20 teens, I started realizing that the documentation and the correspondence, it doesn't add up. It's not part of the Bull Run campaign. And I said, okay, then why was this battle fought? And then I realized that Lee is trying to protect Richmond. He sees an army under John Pope forming in the upper Virginia Piedmont, the Warrenton, Sperryville, Little Washington area, 40,000 guys. He's got to react to that in some way. And so how does he react to that? He reacts to that the same way he reacted to all the activity in the Valley in the spring of '62. He detaches Stonewall Jackson, who is still not part of the Army of Northern Virginia. He's still part of the Valley District, so he's a separate command. And so he detaches Jackson out first to Louisa Courthouse just to kind of monitor what's going on and be close enough to recall to Richmond, and then eventually go after Pope. Pope has, when his army is formed, his initial tasking is to go down to Richmond and strike Richmond from the west while McClellan is striking from the east. Well, in the interim, the 7 days happen and McClellan is backed up into Harrison's Landing. And so Pope's orders change to go down and put pressure on Lee to relieve McClellan and get him out of there successfully. The Lincoln administration, Henry Halleck, won Pope out of there. So all of this activity is not part of the Second Manassas campaign. It's actually the last battle or campaign of the Richmond 1862 campaign.
It's kind of an interesting coda to think about that in the context of the Peninsula Campaign. And that must have just rankled McClellan to think that John Pope has to come and save his bacon.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Those two, well, they didn't get along. John Pope didn't get along with very many people. He was a braggart. He was very obtrusive. And the Army of the Potomac rank and file, well, the officers of the Army of the Potomac didn't like him either because they were, for the most part, Democratic, like fighting the war the old way, the way McClellan is fighting it. Pope is a Republican. He came east with Lincoln on Lincoln's inaugural train. He spent time out west fighting the guerrillas, so he had a whole different mindset about prosecuting this war, and it was just diametrically opposed to the way McClellan and the old school Army wanted to fight it.
I think, when you juxtapose Pope against McClellan, those are two commanders that it's very easy to make fun of, and people have a lot of jabs at their expense. Can you say anything positive about Pope?
Pope had a great plan. When he came east, he had a great plan about how to fight the war in the Virginia Piedmont in the summer of 1862. But he has people like Nathaniel Banks, Franz Sigel, Irwin McDowell with him, who are just not up to the task. So he's never going to be successful in that campaign. Pope realized that the war, again, can't be fought like it has been fought, and so he wants to change the way the war is fought. The Lincoln administration and even Edwin Stanton, they want to change the way the war is fought too, and they use Pope as that hammer to turn the way they're going to prosecute the war. So he's a smart guy. He doesn't have a good supporting cast with him, and he doesn't have the support of the rank and file army. But something to think about with John Pope is that when George McClellan was relieved, where did he go? New Jersey. John Fremont, when he was relieved, where did he go? He disappeared. John Pope ended up back out fighting the Sioux in Minnesota and then down in Missouri. Lincoln saw value in him where he didn't see value in McClellan and some other commanders that are put on the shelf afterwards. So he's got to have points for that. You got to give him points for that.
Is part of that though because McClellan's kind of a political rival, and and literally becomes his political rival, where Pope might not have that potential politicization to him?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That's absolutely the case. McClellan is a problem for the Lincoln administration, and they don't have a way to solve that problem until after the Antietam campaign, when they finally, with the elections, with the midterm elections of 1862 going the way they're going for the Republicans, he can successfully remove McClellan without any big political hit.
Now, when you talk about, Pope had a great plan and didn't have the subordinates to carry that out, and that's just kind of getting me thinking. When Grant comes east, he's able to bring some of his guys with him and replace certain commanders and make command decisions and leave some guys in place, but replaces other. Pope really didn't have that kind of luxury, and of course, we're talking different levels of command, so there's some difference there. But
Sure.
but do you think if Pope had been able to pick his own guys, he might have been more successful? It's a what if question, of course.
Yeah, it's an interesting what if question. Nathaniel Banks is one of the senior major generals in the Army, so you can't get rid of him. He was one of the first brought in. You can't get rid of Franz Sigel because he brings the Germans with him and the Republicans. So the only one you can get rid of is Irwin McDowell, and McDowell's okay, but he's not great. And I don't know who John Pope could have brought with him from the West. I don't know I really don't know who some of his subordinates were that he would have felt comfortable with.
So
again,
it's a tough situation.
He's not well liked.
Yeah, he's stepping into a tough situation. So gotta give him some credit for that. Sherman tends to be the person when people think of hard war, Sherman burning his way through Georgia, blah, blah, blah. But Pope is really kind of like the precursor to that in the way that he wants to prosecute the war. Can you talk a little bit about some of the differences that he sees and how the war should be carried out?
Yeah, absolutely. I got my general orders right here. He fought the guerrillas out in Missouri, and so he learned that you can't just keep your kid gloves on with the way the fighting was going on out there. And I am not deeply knowledgeable on those campaigns, but it's brutal, it's vicious. I mean, you got some of those characters out there that just become infamous during the war and in the post-war. So Pope has to deal with those. When he comes back east, he wants to stop that situation before it gets out of control, and he issues those 3 general orders. He issues a series of them, but the big 3 was General Order number 5, which says, "I'm going to subsist off the land. We're not going to have those long supply lines. They could be interdicted. We're going to come by, and if there's food along the roads, in the barns and the mills, we're going to confiscate that. And if you're a loyal American, we'll give you a voucher. And after the war's over, if you can still prove your loyalty, we're going to give you some money for that." So you know how that's going to work out for the civilians of Virginia. General Order number 7 dealt with the guerrillas operating on the fringe. It got to the point where he said, any house where shots came from would be burned and the occupants treated as prisoners of war. Okay, these are civilians. If a shot came from there, it could be a 12-year-old kid taking a shot, but the house is going to be burned. You're going to be prisoners of war. And then if there's any injuries to the railroads, rolling stock, or wagons, those held responsible are going to be turned out to repair the damage. And you're going to pay for the federal soldiers that are guarding you while you're doing it. And finally, the third one, which really caused some controversy, was General Order number 11, which is going to arrest all disloyal male citizens within their lines. So you take the oath of allegiance, and you stay a good soldier. If you don't, we're going to kick you out to the other side of the lines on the Confederate side. And if we see you back on our side again, we're going to shoot you as a spy. And that has significant ramifications for Pope's officers. because Jefferson Davis and the Confederate government get wind of this and said, oh no, we're not playing this game. They decide that if we capture any of Pope's officers, we're going to treat them like common prisoners. Lee writes some letters to McClellan and to Halleck saying, what's going on here? Why are you fighting the war this way? McClellan, of course, gets a little mealy about it, but the messages go up to Halleck, and he in turn responds back to Lee saying, this is how we're going to do it now. And it's going to have implications for the prisoners, the federal prisoners at Cedar Mountain, where the enlisted men are going to end up at Belle Island and Libby Prison for a little while before they go on to other prisons. But the officers are going to end up in common jails, in the basements with the other dregs of Richmond society, many times in shackles. And it gets so bad and it's so controversial that Army of the Potomac officers captured during the Second Manassas campaign send a letter to the Confederate government saying, we're not part of Pope's army, you can't treat us this way. And they in turn are treated like, the officers are treated like officers. But the federal officers under Pope, some of them are going to linger in these prisons until November before they're finally exchanged. So it's really, really tough.
And of course triggers that famous comment from Lee about Pope being a miscreant who must be suppressed. It always struck me though that Pope comes to this, particularly with his background fighting guerrillas, as a realist versus someone who's thinking of the more romanticized, genteel way of waging the war, which wasn't really happening, even though everyone liked to think it was.
Absolutely, and that's what it is. It was all that kind of type of war was a facade. It really was. During the first Battle of Winchester, there's civilians taking shots of the retreating army of Banks's command. You mentioned Lee calling Pope a miscreant. That is in a letter he writes to his daughter in late July 1862. That the first time I can find that published is in, I think, 1961.
Oh wow!
And I've always wondered, did Lee actually say that to other people? And he talks about that in that letter to his daughter. He's talking about his cousin Lewis Marshall, who was on Pope's staff of all things. Oh. And that's really where the genesis is. He's complaining about Lewis Marshall being on Pope's staff, that miscreant Pope on his staff. I would love, and that's one of those research things that's out there. I've always tried to find out, when did Lee publicly say he was a miscreant?
Yeah. Certainly one of the most famous aspects of the campaign.
Yeah, it is.
Wow. Again, one of those little differences between history and memory and how we remember that story versus where it actually came from. Along those lines, Cedar Mountain tends to get forgotten about because people go from 7 days and jump right up to Second Manassas. And why is it that Cedar Mountain tends to get forgotten in that sequence?
It's not a national battlefield park. It's not a state park, but there could be some changes in the wind on that down the road. And it's out of the way. It's not on I-95, I-64, I-66. So you have to travel to Culpeper, which are good roads, obviously they're not, but it's not interstate, and it's south of Culpeper on a 2-lane road. So it's not forgotten. It's just so out of the way that you have to make a little bit of an effort to get there. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why.
Yeah, that reminds me, like the road took you to Culpeper, and that's what got you interested in Cedar Mountain in the first place. Tell me a little bit about your Cedar Mountain origin story.
My origin story. I always loved the Civil War. My family grew up on the East Coast in South Jersey. I can say I'm from the South Jersey. And in the spring and the fall, we would take week-long trips. And a lot of times they would end up at Civil War battlefields. My first memory of Gettysburg is not the battle itself, is that my dad killed a bee on the bus. So I'd always been interested in the Civil War. I served in the Air Force for 20 years, and you move books around every 3 or 4 years. And we finally had settled down. We'd moved from Manassas, where I had my last military assignment, to the town of Bealton in southern Fauquier County. We bought a house out there, and I'm unloading box after box after books and put them on the bookshelf. And I'm saying, I gotta do something. I've got all this, I've gained this knowledge. I want to do something. And the following week, in one of the local papers, advertised at the Brandy Station Foundation in Brandy Station, Virginia, I was looking for volunteers. That was 10 miles away. I said, okay, I can do this. And so I got involved with the Brandy Station Foundation, particularly the house that's there called the Graffiti House. The second floor is covered in Civil War graffiti. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece of history that's captured here. Jeb Stuart's signatures on the wall there, of all people. So there's some great stories there that they've been able to, and I helped them develop based on those signatures. So I was with them for about 8 years. Everybody studies the Battle of Brandy Station if you're at Brandy Station. And I said, okay, fine. I'm not going to do that. I can read about it. I'll know about it. So I started studying the winter encampment, 120,000 guys, which means there's 120,000 stories. Mm-hmm. and the two big battles at Rappahannock Station in August 1862 and the bigger one in November 63. So I started focusing on those and learned a lot, and I developed a lot of knowledge for those that fight and the winter. And then in 2012, I needed a change, and so I resigned. I was on the board at Brandy Station, and I resigned, and I had about a month where I wasn't doing anything, and I went to a Museum of Culpeper History open house in February of 2012, February 2012, and one of the board members, beautiful little Southern lady by the name of Mary Jo Browning, she's about 5 foot nothing, and I like to say that she started pointing her finger at me and pushed me up against the wall and said, "You're going to join the Friends of Cedar Mountain Battlefield," and I just said, "Yes, ma'am." That's all I could do is yes, ma'am. That was their sesquicentennial, so I had from February to August to learn about Cedar Mountain, and so that was a real steep learning curve, and that's how I got involved. That's how I kind of migrated south from Brandy Station to Cedar Mountain, and it's been a great journey ever since.
Now, you're still involved with the Friends of Cedar Mountain, and you've done a lot to help develop that battlefield with some of the interpretation, the walking trails. What do people find if they go out to Cedar Mountain today?
What you're going to find is a battlefield that looks like the battlefield did in 1862.
Oh, that's always a treat. That's always
it is. The big thing you're going to see is a 2-lane paved road that bisects it. That's Route 15. There's still farms there. They're bigger and more modern, but the farms are still there. The terrain of the landscape, the elevations are still the same. There's woodlots that are now fields and fields that are woodlots. But if a soldier went back there, he would recognize that ground. So that's the first big thing. The second thing is, because it is owned by America, essentially, it's owned by the American Battlefield Trust. So it is basically public property. You can come out there and parking, and you can go hiking the trails. We've got a couple 3 miles of trails out there through woods and out in the open. It gets hot in summertime, just like it did in 1862. So you got to be smart. So we got some great trails with right now we have 7 waysides out there open for interpretation. Right now, myself and another colleague historian of mine out there, Brad Forbush, we have revised those, and they're going through the chop chain process now. And we hope to have completely new waysides in place by the 160th anniversary in August. In addition to those 7, we've developed 2 more, because there's parts of the battlefield that just haven't been interpreted, and we found, well, if we can do 7, we can do 9, and so we're doing those. You're also going to find on that battlefield one regimental monument that's on public property, and there's 4 others that are on private property that we have access to out there that the 5 federal regiments put in post-war. So you've got Civil War monumentation out there. We also have what we call the Grimsley markers. 61 markers were put in by Judge Daniel Grimsley, 6x6 granite stones into the ground where these guys fought in 1901 and 1902. 22 of them have still survived, and we've got those recovered, and most of them are on the battlefield, either where they were originally on the preserve ground where they were originally, or in an area where we call the point. So there's monuments out there.
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
fascinated when you told me that aside from like the original Big Five battlefields, Cedar Mountain was one of the most heavily monumented battlefields in the country.
Like to say, we were number 5 behind Gettysburg, Antietam, Vicksburg, and Chattanooga. So you got the 5 regimentals, you got the 61 Grimsley markers, and in August 1926, the UDC put in a marker there. I want to say it was the Western Battlefield Association. A lot of people confuse it for a Freedman marker down in the Richmond area, but it's a whole it's a copycat. It's a whole different organization. And so you could in 1926 you could drive your Model T or whatever you're driving that day up to the battlefield and alongside the road and read a marker that was put in there without getting out of your car.
Yeah. So quite a bit for being out of the way. There's quite a bit to make that drive worthwhile.
Absolutely, and if you tire of Cedar Mountain, I can't ever anticipating that happening. You've got Morton's Ford, Brandy Station, Rappahannock Station, the Battle of Culpeper Courthouse, the National Cemetery, Stevensburg, Hansborough Ridge area, just down the road, Germanna Ford, and you go into the Overland Campaign stuff. So you throw a stick, you're going to hit Civil War history there.
I want to take a second to mention the cemetery in particular, run by the Veterans Association, Veterans Administration. Beautiful little cemetery.
It is. It was in 1866, just on the outside of town, and it also has 5 Cedar Mountain monuments in there. And the last one of the last ones was put in was in 1902, the New York Monument, and it was the last time that members of the 28th New York and the 5th Virginia Infantry Stonewall Brigade got together. They started having reunions together in the early 1880s. And this was the last time they had a reunion together at the dedication of that monument. Also in that cemetery is 912 unknowns from Cedar Mountain. And it's got history all the way up to modern Gulf War. There's the general who captured Hermann Goring is in there.
Oh.
There's two Thunderbirds in there, the U.S. Air Force demonstration team. There's just all kinds of history in there.
Yeah, it's literally right on the edge of downtown.
It's walking distance from the museum at the train depot.
And it originally, as I recall, the property belonged to A.P. Hill's brother. Is that correct?
I believe so. I think that property, it was probably purchased for a fee. Here's your choice. You can sell it to us, or we're going to take it. But you can see it. You could see it as the train went through town. So all the veterans and people who were traveling through that part of the country would go right by that cemetery. So it was very visual.
So you got all this information in your head about Cedar Mountain. You helped with the development of the battlefield, and then you decide, hey, you know what? I'm going to write a book. That sounds like a great idea. Tell me a little bit about that writing process.
Well, it actually started before that, because I got a call from Dave Roth, Blue and Gray magazine, in about 2014, 2015, and said, I need you to do an article on Cedar Mountain for me. And I said, okay. And so I chomped out about 18,000 words for him. And as I got done with that, I said, I know the Emerging Civil War series is around 40,000 words. I could probably find 22,000 more words for this. And I reached out to you, and I reached out to people like Rob Orris and Kevin Pollack, other ECW authors that I knew and respected. And I said, okay, what do I got to do? And so I started gathering more material, because you can never have enough material. Right. And I started scoping out, how do I want to tell the story? How do I want to? The Carnage Is Fearful is an expansion of the Blue and Gray article. That was my foundation, and so I used that information, build it into into a more in-depth story of Cedar Mountain, realizing that the only book that was out there prior was Bob Crick's Stonewall Jackson and Cedar Mountain. It's a great book, written in 1989, 1990, but it's Stonewall Jackson at Cedar Mountain. It really, the Union, the Federal Army there was a minor supporting cast in that book, to the point where the 2 Medal of Honors that are won at Cedar Mountain aren't even mentioned in Bob's book.
Wow.
Now, I'm okay with that because it's Stonewall Jackson at Cedar Mountain.
It
And I
is
said,
what it
okay,
advertises. Yeah.
so I said, I'm okay with this. So I said, I got to be sure that the story is balanced when I write this. And I admit I lean a little towards the federal side because their story wasn't told before. And there's just so many stories out there. As I did more and more research, I found letters, I found diaries, I found memoirs that really fill out what happened on the other side of the field that Bob chose not to cover. And so I just continued building on that. And unfortunately, I've got enough for another 40,000 words at some point in my life.
And you'll discover now that the book is out, people will come out of the woodwork with like, oh, by the way, here's this or here's that. It's like, oh, where was this 6 months ago?
Yeah, I found that. But that's one of the things we do. We do monthly tours out at Cedar Mountain, and then we have people that reach out to us. And we always look forward to someone who said, well, my great grandpappy fought here. And I said, well, tell me his story. Yeah. What kind of information do you have? And we have gotten a wealth of information for our archives at Cedar Mountain. I've been able to pull some too. I've learned early in my public historic work that people don't understand moving the blue bars and the red bars around a map on a battlefield to explain things. I give them an overview and I talk about the people because that's who's there. I talk about the stories of the people that were in action here and what their lives were like maybe before, during, and after the fight, because that's what they're going to walk away with in the end. They're not going to remember that the 46th Pennsylvania went charging across the field. They're going to remember that a guy in the 28th New York got shot 5 times in about 15 seconds. That's what they're going to remember.
So as you wrote the book, who did you come to appreciate better when you talk about these characters? Who's someone you learned?
I came to appreciate the brigade commanders that are here. Yeah. This battle is fought by the brigade commanders. Stonewall Jackson spends most of the fight on the far right flank of the 3 division commanders that he has with him. Ewell's on the mountain and doesn't play a big role. Winder gets killed early in the fight, and A.P. Hill's the last guy there, so he doesn't really have an impact either. The 2 federal division commanders, Chris Auger and Alpheus Williams, they're just kind of throwing troops in the battle. The battle is fought by the brigades. And so I've really gained appreciation of the brigade commanders. Samuel Crawford's his first fight as a brigade commander. Does a pretty good job. Lawrence O'Brien Branch was 40 years old and had probably 3 lives, successful lives, before he got to Cedar Mountain. And he's the guy really that saves the battle for Jackson, because he's lined up ready to go when Jackson when he tries to draw his sword and it's attached to the scabbard. Branch is the guy, his 5 regiments are ready to go into combat, and he's the one that saves the day for Jackson. But he's from North Carolina, so you don't hear about that.
Yeah. I used to have a painting by Mort Kunstler, or no, it was a Don Torioni painting on my wall of Jackson is with you.
Jackson's with you, yeah.
So very dramatic. But I've always thought it was crazy because everyone talks about how Jackson's Valley campaign in '62 was so remarkable, and one of the people he beats out there is Banks. And really, Cedar Mountain's a rematch of Jackson versus Banks, and Jackson almost blows the battle. He almost loses it against someone who's widely considered a pretty subpar general. Right. How did that almost happen?
That almost happens because on August 8th, Jackson, being Jackson, miscommunicates his orders to march.
Never heard of that before.
Yeah, isn't that bold concept? He sends orders out to his 3 division commanders for an order to march from the Orange Courthouse area, about 10, 12 miles south of Cedar Mountain, to Cedar Mountain. Well, as soon as he issues those orders, he changes the line of march from Richard Ewell. So Richard Ewell goes by a secondary road to go to a place called Barnett's Ford. He doesn't tell A.P. Hill, who's supposed to be next in line. This is A.P. Hill's first march with Jackson, so we want to get it right. And these 2 guys have a history anyway, dating back to West Point. In one of my appendixes, it talks about that relationship. Caitlin Bitely did a marvelous job in the appendix of talking about the relationship of these 2 guys. So Jackson cuts new orders for Ewell, doesn't tell Hill. Hill's lined up there at dark 30 in the morning watching these Confederates walking by. He's new to the command. He doesn't know who these guys are. And he realizes it's Charles Winder, the 3rd guy in line. And so he has missed his turn to march, which is when Jackson walks up or rides up. And you can understand the kind of personalities that Jackson and Hill have, that kind of conversation. It didn't go well for either of them. And the relationship never recovered. It was always bad, but it never recovered. Between Ewell and his march, when he got to Barnett's Ford, his wagons muddied up the ford and no one else could get across. It was a huge traffic jam. So Ewell ends up about 5 miles from Cedar Mountain. Charles Winder gets across the Rapidan River, and that's all. Hill never really gets out of Orange Courthouse. So Jackson and his fabled foot cavalry don't do the job that day. The heat plays a significant role on both sides. Soldiers on both sides are dying of sunstroke. The Federal cavalry under this guy named John Buford, new to the field, and George Bayard are harassing the Confederates on their line of march all day long, to the point where by the time the day is done, Jackson's going to detach 2 brigades just to protect his line of communications. Those guys will not see anything in the fight. So Jackson has had a terrible day of march, doesn't achieve his objectives for the day, doesn't think he's going to be able to do anything the next day when he finally shows up on the battlefield. On the other side, you've got Nathaniel Banks. Nathaniel Banks spends the night before the battle north of Culpeper along a small river called the Hazel River. He has 1 brigade of infantry under Crawford on the battlefield, 2 batteries of artillery, and of course Bayard and Buford. So they're south of the battlefield. Banks gets orders to march south to protect the advance approaches to Culpeper. So he marches south. As he's marching south, he passes a division of infantry under James Ricketts from McDowell's Corps. Ricketts is camped at a little place called Colvin Tavern, 2 miles from the battlefield. Spoiler alert, they don't play in the fight. They bought a ticket. So Banks is marching his men on the field the same time as Jackson's men are starting to arrive. Again, it's the heat of the afternoon. Pope's verbal orders to Banks is to set out your skirmishers, engage with the skirmishers, don't bring on a general engagement. That's his orders. That's what Pope says. Banks says something completely different. He says, if they engage, you engage. Now, Banks has spent the spring getting his butt kicked up and down the Shenandoah Valley. So he's got that chip on his shoulder.
Yeah.
One of Pope's staff, a brigadier general by the name of Roberts, is also baiting Banks, saying, you must press them today. You must press them today. You can do this. You can take them on. So Banks has got his brigades lining up to protect the approach to Culpeper, and he sees Early's brigade show up on the field and clear out Alfred Dufier's Rhode Island Cavalry Regiment. He sees maybe some Confederates in the woods off to his right, and he sees some infantry and artillery going up on the hill on Cedar Mountain. Jackson is advancing on one road. Banks thinks he's got a chance here to defeat him in detail if he can get himself organized in advance. Well, that doesn't happen. And again, in the end, it's 9,000 men under Nathaniel Banks against 22,000 for Stonewall Jackson. And Jackson's able to get his men up in time because of Banks's 5 brigades, 4 of them are going to make an assault. The 5th is going to hold the left. And they are all staggered individual brigade assaults. There's no coordination. It's 1862. There's no coordination. And so Banks does achieve a breakthrough with Crawford, but there's nothing to follow it up.
Nothing.
And that's why Battle of Cedar Mountain was the Battle of Cedar Mountain. If Banks doesn't attack and he sits there on a great position on high ground with artillery support and on a tree-covered ridgeline, Jackson has no chance to advance or attack late in the afternoon when he finally gets there. And this Battle of Cedar Mountain never happens. And then you got to wonder, the what if is, if the Battle of Cedar Mountain doesn't happen, Jackson withdraws the next day. Pope has 2.5 corps of infantry, 3 brigades of cavalry, and he could advance south and try to do what he was tasked to do, which was maneuver Jackson out of Gordonsville and Charlottesville.
He's got a couple of good routes of advance if he wants to head south from there. Yeah.
He does. Along the Rapidan or along the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. He's got the old James Madison Road, and he's got the Culpeper Orange Courthouse Road. So he's got 3 good avenues to advance on, and he's got signal stations up on the mountains in the area, and so he's got great observation about what Jackson's up to. He could be successful, but it's Nathaniel Banks.
Yeah, but it's Nathaniel Banks, and I think that at least from my point of view, the most important outcome of this battle is that it poisons the environment for Pope going into then what becomes the second Manassas campaign. Like here, he's had this setback that really undercuts his credibility before he really has the chance to take battlefield command.
He does. I don't think he feels it's a big setback. Yes, Banks's corps is chewed up, but he's got Ricketts, and he's got McDowell's corps, and he's got Franz Siegel's corps. So he's got punch still. He's got punch. And with Jackson falling back to the other side of the Rapidan, his forces advanced down there. So he's in a position to advance again. He's also got Burnside's corps showing up at Aquia Landing, starting to move to the west. So if he could get his act together in time, he would be able to continue what he wanted to accomplish, which was push Jackson out of Gordonsville in that rail junction there. Unfortunately, Lee sees an opportunity because of Jackson, as I like to say, punching Banks in the nose. He sees that McClellan has starting to embark at Harrison's Landing and head back north, so he can detach basically Longstreet's wing of the army and start moving it towards Louisa and Gordonsville, and that becomes the genesis for the second Manassas campaign. So Lee gets into position to advance before Pope does. One of the geographic challenges of Culpeper County is, if you think of Culpeper County as a piece of pie, the crust is the Blue Ridge Mountains, and the 2 slices sides is the Rappahannock River and the Rapidan River.
Right.
North of Culpeper and south of Culpeper, the ground is higher. You don't want to get caught in Culpeper County against an advancing army. Yeah. Pope realizes that when he sees Lee starting to maneuver, and so he falls back to the Rappahannock River line. So Lee took the initiative away. Jackson had a great position along the Pope had a great position along the Rappahannock River, but Jackson does his flank march that takes him to Bristow, and that whole fiasco for Pope. And that's really where things start going downhill for Pope.
Gotcha. So there's the potential for some interesting things to happen out at Cedar Mountain and Brandy Station. Some really preliminary news coming out of Richmond. Do you want to touch on that just briefly,
Sure.
Knowing that things are sort of tentative?
It's been tentative for about 6 years now, which is good because we started making progress. The American Battlefield Trust purchases land to save it and preserve it. They don't like holding on to it because it becomes a liability down the road, and they want to turn it over to organizations like Central Virginia Battlefield Trust or Gettysburg National Battlefield Park. Cedar Mountain and Brandy Station, their organizations are really not strong enough to manage that land. And so in 2014, I think it was, the trust approached the Commonwealth of Virginia and said, you have a requirement, a stated requirement to have a state park within, I think, 75 miles of everybody in Virginia. I think that's what the number is. There's a big donut hole in Culpeper. And so what they proposed was to sell the land at a cost to the Commonwealth of Virginia at Brandy Station over 1,500 acres and Cedar Mountain around 500 acres for a state park. And so that has been working its way through the system for a number of years. And it's been painful, and we have endured and we've waited because that's how government works. Well, Glenn Youngkin, our new governor, who was sworn in the first part of January, one of his goals he put into the budget was $4.93 million for a state park at Brandy Station in Cedar Mountain. So we have significant movement. Caught some of us quite by surprise, and we are working with our lobbyists in Richmond and our legislators that service those counties and the battlefields to make something happen. So the possibility exists that by the time the budget's all ratified and accepted, we could have the money in place for the purchase of the land for a state park out in Culpeper County. And what that gives you is, besides all that land, you have 2 dynamic friends groups. You have trails in place. You have waysides in place. You even have some modern structures out there that could be used for administration and maintenance buildings for the staff. You have a strong economic what's the word I'm looking for? The economic development community in Culpeper realizes the value of Civil War battlefields and what they can bring to the economy. And so we have strong proponents in the economy. The Board of Supervisors are in favor of this. So we could see some really exciting news by this fall.
Wow.
Fingers crossed. And we're still purchasing land out there. We purchased 50 acres last December. The American Battlefield Trust purchased 50 acres last December. We're the 10th Maine and the 1st Pennsylvania, Richard Falls 1st Pennsylvania Cavalry Battalion advanced across. And then we've got some land that's going to link some other properties together that they're in the process of purchasing now another, I think it's 48 acres. So we're still growing. We're still growing.
And with now a new book about the battle to help people find their way around the battlefield.
It's what I like about it, and like other people have commented to me on is the tour. Yeah, it's got a great story, but the driving tour and the walking tours in there help you get from point to point, and you can look out and say, oh, wait a minute. Okay, I get it now. I understand why this piece of ground is so important and why they fought for it. So yeah, it's a great resource for anyone who wants to come out and see Cedar Mountain. Absolutely.
The book is called The Carnage Was Fearful, The Battle of Cedar Mountain. The author is Michael Block. Mike, thanks so much for spending some time with us today.
Chris, thank you very much for having me. I'm glad I was able to do this for you.
I'm Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.